Number 5. King Tut. The Curse of the Pharaohs, or the Mummy's Curse, is a curse alleged to be cast upon anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially a pharaoh. This curse, which does not differentiate between thieves or archaeologists, is claimed to cause bad luck, illness, or death. The tomb of Tutankhamun, or King Tut for short, was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by excavators led by the Egyptologist Howard Carter and his friend George Herbert, otherwise known as Lord Carnarvon, more than 3,300 years after King Tut's death and burial. Whereas the tombs of most pharaohs were plundered by grave robbers in ancient times, Tut's tomb was hidden by debris for most of its existence and therefore not extensively robbed. The unexpectedly rich burial consisted of more than 5,000 objects, many of which were in a highly fragile state, so conserving the burial goods for removal from the tomb required an unprecedented effort. It thus became the first known largely intact royal burial from ancient Egypt. To date, the discovery of the tomb is widely considered one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of all time. The opulence of the burial goods inspired a media frenzy and popularized ancient Egyptian-inspired designs with the Western public. To the Egyptians, who had recently become partially independent of British rule, the tomb became a symbol of national pride, strengthening Pharaonism, a nationalist ideology that emphasized modern Egypt's ties to the ancient civilization, and creating friction between Egyptians and the British-led excavation team. Just 2 months after opening the tomb to the public, George Herbert was dead of red body fluid poisoning from a mosquito bite on his cheek. Several people, such as the author Marie Corelli and a psychic known as Cairo, claimed to have warned George of mortal peril before his death. Arthur Weigel, a former Egyptologist who served as the Daily Mail correspondent on the tomb, said he had observed George joking as he entered the tomb and remarked, "If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live." George's son and heir, Henry, said that Cairo suffered a power outage at the moment of his father's death, and in England, his father's dog let out a howl and died at the same time. Another such story, recounted by those involved in the excavation, involved a canary that Howard Carter had bought at the beginning of the digging season. Initially, the Egyptian workmen regarded the bird as a sign of good luck, and when the tomb was discovered, they dubbed it the Tomb of the Bird. When a cobra entered Howard's house and ate the canary, the Egyptians then called it an ill omen, relating the intruding animal to Uraeus, the protective cobra emblem on the brow of King Tut's statues. When George A. Gold, who had visited the tomb, died the following May, his death was also attributed to the curse, as was that of Aubrey Herbert, George's half-brother, in September. Later additions to the list of cursed deaths included those of Mace in 1928, George's secretary Richard Berthel in 1929, and Weigel in 1934, along with Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who examined the mummy. And still for others, a slew of bad luck awaited them. Howard's friend, Sir Bruce Ingram, had his house burned down and later flood, thanks to a gift he was given that came from the tomb. Honestly, this is enough for me to never want to disturb a tomb in my lifetime, but let's move on and strengthen my argument. Number 4. Tamerlane. In June of 1941, Mikhail Gerasimov, a Soviet scientist, wanted to dig up the Conqueror Tamerlane to reconstruct his face. That was his kind of thing as a doctor. He pioneered the field of paleoanthropology, which is just a very scholarly way of saying reconstructing the dead. Hey, it's a lot better than what a lot of other doctors were specializing in at that time. Local residents and Muslim clergy tried to stop the excavations, but the expedition continued its work despite everything. Tash Mohammad Kariniyazov was the leader of the expedition, which, other than Mikhail, also included the writer and historian Sadrian Aini, the famous Orientalist A. Semenov, and M. Gerasimov, along with a young cinematographer by the name of Malik Kayumov. These excavations were mainly aimed to examine the human remains in the tombs and to prove that they belonged to Tamerlane and his closest relatives. The group first opened the tombs of Ulugh-Bek's son and then the tomb of Timur's sons, Miran-Shah and Shahrukh. On June 18th, they discovered the remains of Ulugh-Bek, the grandson of Timur, and on June 19th, the heavy gravestone was taken from the Tamerlane's tomb. All this was done while ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself. The first warning was inscribed in plain sight and well known, saying, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." The second was a surprise, hidden within the tomb itself, reading, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Well, finally on June 20th, the tomb of Tamerlane was opened, and the mausoleum was filled with a sharp, choking odor that of the mixture of resins, camphor, rose, and frankincense. It should be noted that Timur died in Otrar on his way to China, so to be buried in Samarkand, he had to be embalmed. 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded Russia. Few would argue that the evil German dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was already planned and underway before the invasion of Russia. Of course, sure, you can argue that, but you also have to note that in 1942, when the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad changed the course of the war for the Russians. Number 3. Casimir IV Jagiellon. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that again. The first time was bad enough, so from here on out he will be referred to as King C for my my ease of being. Poland has a bit of a broken and weird history as a nation, but one of their brightest eras came thanks in part to King C. Under his reign, he famously subdued the Teutonic Knights once and for all, and fought hard to retain the union between Poland and Lithuania, all the while recovering lost lands taken from previous kings. His efforts were largely successful, thus ranking him as one of Poland's most notable leaders. King C was eventually interred at Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. The tomb is a late Gothic masterpiece made from mainly red marble from Adnet, near Salzburg. It is composed of a sarcophagus, over which was sculpted a canopy and supported by ornate arches. The inside of the canopy was lined with limestone and includes a late Gothic crown. The nature of the sculpting of the crown and arches echoes the ornate carving of wooden altarpieces at the time. The arches are supported by marble pillars, the capitals of which feature biblical scenes. A full-length sculpted effigy of Casimir lies on top of the sarcophagus, and it's an unusual depiction. King C is presented as being in agony and is dressed in a clerical cloak only used at coronations. The sides of the sarcophagus bear the arms of King C's kingdoms and territories. In 1973, a group of archaeologists and researchers were eager to figure out more about the king's death nearly 500 years after his funeral, and they dug right in and opened it up like a Kinder egg. Unfortunately, things didn't go well for the excavation team. Unearthing the king under Wawel Chapel was easy enough, but it's the examination that started to claim so many lives. Even as it was in progress, those involved started to die from strokes and infections, and within days, 4 were dead. Within years, around 15 were dead. While it has since been proven that it was a fungus inside the coffin that was the cause of death, there's always a possibility that maybe, just maybe, it was something more sinister. Curses don't always have to present as a mysterious unknown. They can have explainable science behind them, for crying out loud. Number 2, Nostradamus. It's not surprising that the man who could predict the future sought to protect his resting place with a curse as well as a prediction of when his tomb would be raided. After all, nothing about Nostradamus is ever complete without a good prediction or two. So he was a French astrologer, apothecary, physician, and reputed seer, best known for his book Les Prophéties, which was published in 1555 and is a collection of 942 poetic quatrains allegedly predicting future events. Nostradamus' father's family had originally been Jewish, but had converted to Catholic Christianity a generation before he was born. He studied at the University of Avignon, but was forced to leave after just over a year when the university closed due to an outbreak of the plague. He worked as an apothecary for several years before entering the University of Montpellier, hoping to earn a doctorate, but was almost immediately expelled after his work, which at the time was forbidden by university statutes, was discovered. He first married in 1531, but his wife and 2 descendants died in 1533 during another plague outbreak. He fought alongside doctors against the plague before remarrying to Anne Ponsarde, with whom he had 6 descendants. He wrote an almanac for 1550, and as a result of its success, continued writing them for future years as he began working as an astrologer for various wealthy patrons. He suffered from severe gout towards the end of his life, which eventually developed into edema. In late June of 1566, he summoned his lawyers to draw up an extensive will bequeathing his property plus 3,444 crowns, which is around 300,000 American in today's currency, minus a few debts, to his wife pending her remarriage, in trust for her sons pending their 25th birthdays and her daughters pending their marriages. On the evening of July the 1st, he is alleged to have told his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." And what do you know? The next morning, he was reportedly found dead, lying on the floor next to his bed and a bench. He was buried in the local Franciscan chapel in Salon, but reinterred during the French Revolution in the Collégiale Saint-Laurent, where his tomb remains to this day. In a quintessential Nostradamus quatrain, he calls out whoever would dare disturb his tomb. He who will open the tomb found, and will come to close it promptly, evil will come to him, and one will be unable to prove if it would be better to be a Breton or a Norman king. A report from York University goes into detail about what just kinda happened when the tomb of Nostradamus was disturbed in 1793. In the heart of the French Revolution, French soldiers went after the fabled tomb, ignoring the supposed rumor that whoever opens the tomb would be, killed. It's said that the soldier who opened the tomb found a sign around Nostradamus' neck that predicted the exact date. After drinking wine out of his skull, the soldier was then killed by a stray bullet. Hey, that's what you get for messing with the wishes of the dead, my dude. Number 1, Mexico City mummies. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History says the appearance of fungal growth on a traveling display is causing concern, and rightfully so. Known as the Mummies of Guanajuato, the exhibit made an appearance in the United States in 2009. But it was like a recent stop in Mexico City, showing off 6 mummies in glass cases that has led the Institute to alert the public, especially considering they don't know just how airtight those glass display cases really are, and that they're without warnings or safeguards against biohazards. From some of the published photos, at least one of the corpses on display, which was inspected in November of 2021, shows signs of a proliferation of possible fungus colonies. Now, if you remember the infections that have emerged from other tombs as revenge, I'm calling that for this one as well. Experts believe the 19th or 20th century corpses were unintentionally unintentionally mummified as a possible byproduct of the mineral-rich environment, an airtight, dry underground burial vault, or some other environmental cause. Some of the mummies still have hair, skin, and even preserved clothing, but there's an obvious lack of embalming or other common mummification products. In the early 1900s, the poses and marketing of the mummy exhibit took on a distinct horror element. Some of the bodies were positioned with arms folded across chest and jaws in an open position to create the appearance that the mummies were screaming, which is extremely disrespectful to the dead. In February of 2022, an effort was launched to begin identifying the mummies, but nothing yet.
Kicking off at number 5, Coral Castle. And no, that is not my imitation of Rick Grimes trying to call his son a fortified structure. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. But the actual mystery of Coral Castle is equal parts true engineering enigma and equal parts perhaps the most American thing that you've ever heard of. Along the highways and byways of rural America, there are countless tourist attractions that litter the way, but one of them in particular may actually have a much more intriguing mystery than the rest. Just before 1920, a Latvian man named Edward Leedskalnin was jilted by his young bride just a day before their wedding, and so dejected and depressed, Edward left his home country to head to America. Here, after becoming a recluse and discovering a strange affinity for magnetism, Edward spent the next 28 years constructing a bizarre megalithic castle from oolite, a limestone sediment similar to coral. Now, although the vast majority of this structure now is ruinous, which operates as a popular tourist attraction on the roadside, the actual structural properties of Coral Castle have baffled people for decades. Given the fact that Leedskalnin worked completely alone, shifting over 1,000 tons of oolite rock into place with no conventional machinery and no other means of hauling such a large amount of minerals and materials. As the legend goes, at one point a few local teenagers claimed to have stumbled upon Leedskalnin working on the structure late at night, reporting that he had caused the blocks of coral to move like hydrogen balloons, floating perfectly into place without the aid of any tools. Strangely enough, this led to wild rumours that Leedskalnin was using telekinesis to build the castle, a claim which he refuted. In fact, the only tool that Leedskalnin ever spoke of using was a machine that he referred to as a perpetual motion holder. Before his death, whenever he was asked how he constructed the place, he simply stated that he understood the laws of weight and leverage well, and on several occasions he stated publicly that he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids, and that once you know how to do it, it's easy. I mean, this one is a little tongue-in-cheek, but what do you guys think? Another eccentric recluse with too much time on his hands, or a structural genius that had insight into a long forgotten knowledge? Let me know. Coming in at number 4, Casper Hower. And who the hell was Casper Hower? A mystery that has completely perplexed historians for nearly 2 centuries, leading to an insane web of speculation, an entire network of conspiracy that extends its tendrils all the way to the royalty of Napoleon. On the 26th of May 1828, a teenage boy appeared on the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. His name was Caspar, a boy of 16. He was filthy, could speak only a few words, and had a letter with him addressed to a captain of the Bavarian cavalry. He kept repeating the phrase, "I want to be a cavalryman as my father was," in Old Bavarian, but the city guard dismissed his ramblings and imprisoned him as just another vagabond in Nuremberg Castle. His strange origin drew the attention of the city's mayor, who claimed that despite his stunted appearance, the boy had an excellent memory and was quick to learn. Eventually, after befriending the mayor, Casper spoke of what he could remember of his life before, and explained in great detail at living totally alone in a darkened cell 2 meters long, 1 meter wide. Each morning, Casper said, he would wake to find rye bread and water next to his bed. Periodically, he said the water would taste bitter, and after drinking it, he would sleep more heavily than usual, where he'd wake up to find his hair and his nails had been cut. Casper claimed that the first human he had contact with was a mysterious man dressed in a dark hood, his face completely covered. He taught him to write his name and taught him the same phrase he would repeat when he was found. Eventually, this story led the European aristocracy to believe that Casper was an exiled prince, held captive for his entire life to prevent a line of succession. As the year passed, Casper would live and learn in many of the Bavarian noble houses, where allegedly there were many attempts on his life by the same hooded men that he had described in the darkened cell. They got him in the end though, and on the 14th of December 1833 he was mysteriously stabbed and he died 3 days later. On his grave in Latin read the words, "Here lies a mysterious one who was killed in a mysterious manner." Beats me. Next up at number 3, the mystery of Oak Island. And whilst many of you will know this particular entry, there's no denying the fact that the eternal mystery that is Oak Island is worth mentioning every single damn time, and its inception is an event that has long evaded the unscrupulous eye of history. You know the story, right? In Nova Scotia, just off the coast of eastern Canada, lies a small island that has allegedly been the site of our civilization's greatest of treasures, although no one has ever been able to locate the exact point of where that treasure lies, causing countless individuals to fall into a wild obsession with unearthing its eternal mystery. In fact, the cause of Oak Island's mystery is down to the fact people have found treasure there, many of which have been carbon dated to several hundred years old, and the story of the Money Pit, a mysterious shaft that has been excavated countless times throughout history, which actually exists with actual structural records, has forced dozens of businesses to go bankrupt trying to solve its enigma. So here we are with our mystery. Who the hell built this place? Now, there are hundreds of theories as to who would have constructed such an intricate place to conceal their treasure, the most popular being Captain William Kidd, the pirate that sailed to North America in the late 1600s, burying his plunder there so no one else could find it. Another theory states that the pit was constructed to house none other than Mary Antoinette's jewels, who after the Parisian uprising at the Palace of Versailles gave her treasures to a lady-in-waiting, who then fled France and ended up in Nova Scotia, where, using her royal connections, contracted the French Navy to construct the Oak Island pit, making sure that the incredibly rare jewels of her queen would never be discovered. And strangely enough, there has actually been credible evidence for this theory recently in 2017, when a 500-year-old brooch was discovered containing a huge garnet similar to that of which Mary Antoinette was reported to often wear. I mean, we could talk about all of these theories for an entire video, but as so far as unsolved events in history go, this one remains to be exactly that. Swinging in at number 2, the Yonaguni Monument. Okay, where do we even begin with this one? Because if you've seen any of our Ancient Mysteries series, then this one definitely deserves its place amongst their ilk. But the event that we're possibly alluding to in the case of the Yonaguni Monument may be a geological enigma that predates known civilization itself, involving an entire continent submerging deep beneath the ocean. Yeah, and whilst that may sound like a massive leap, let's just take a look at the strange properties of the Yonaguni Monument before we jump to any kind of conclusions. Off the coast of Japan, submerged beneath the southernmost Ryukyu Islands, lie a formation of potentially man-made monoliths, which has led to decades of debate as to the true nature of this strange geological formation. The monument itself consists of very fine sandstone and mudstone, with its main feature being a rectangular formation measuring about 90 feet tall and consisting of several other strange formations that seemingly don't make sense as to how they have been naturally formed. Now, despite this massive debate between the Yonaguni Monument being natural or man-made, perhaps the most mind-blowing theory comes from the renowned geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, who states that the Yonaguni Monument is indeed most likely a natural formation, possibly used and modified by humans in the past before seemingly sliding away to the murky depths of the ocean during a geological event that occurred in ancient history. On the flip side, the geologist that discovered the monument, Masaaki Kimura, claimed that the structure was undoubtedly artificial, created by an ancient civilization at least 10,000 years ago, accurately carved and created before sliding into the ocean following unknown tectonic activity. Kimura also goes on to say that not only that, but he can also identify a nearby pyramid, castles, entire roads, other monuments, an entire stadium at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, this one is quite something. What do you guys think? Let me know. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the creation of Baalbek. Because, holy moly, if this one isn't one of the most mysterious unsolved events in history, I'm not entirely sure what is. Who the hell built Baalbek in Lebanon, the most mysterious ruins of the entire Roman Empire, a monumental, supposedly 2,000-year-old temple to the god Jupiter that sits atop 3 separate 1,000-ton stone blocks? To put it into perspective, the monoliths at Stonehenge weigh about 1/40th of that. Yeah, you heard that correctly. 1,000-ton stone blocks. And despite being the diligent record keepers that they were, there is no record of who ordered this temple to be built, how these monolithic stones were cut, why they were cut, or how they even came to be, and how the temple itself came to be abandoned, because for the most part, whoever built Baalbek just up and left. Now, there are many mythological and cultural legends as to the origins of Baalbek. Some say that Cain built it to hide away from the wrath of God. Others say that giants built it at the command of Nimrod, which would eventually become the Tower of Babel. In fact, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, some claim that the intergalactic landing pad alluded to in its tale was in itself Baalbek, a site constructed purely for the reception of ancient astronauts. In fact, though, the actual mystery of Baalbek resides more within its geographical location. What was the point in cutting such enormous rocks out in the middle of nowhere? Why was this temple even built where it was? And why would the Romans go to such great lengths to create a structure that wasn't efficient in location instead of next to a major city or a port? The Romans weren't exactly known for doing things without efficiency and purpose. That's what made them so successful, after all. In fact, Baalbek seems so out of character to have been built by the Romans that many scholars completely eschew any historical engineering correlation with them and simply state that the Romans never built Baalbek but discovered it and then added their iconic pillars to Jupiter and repurposed the ruins as their own kind of temple. Yeah, I'm stumped, guys. The construction of Baalbek, who made it, when they did, how they did it, and why they did it remains to be one of the most mysterious events in history. Kicking off at number 5, Stone Tongue. Which again is a pretty damn awesome name for a death metal band, right? But if you're a fan of this series, you'll already know that lists like these are literal golden skull mines for naming yourselves in all your death metal glory. So metalheads that are looking for a band name, take note, please. And also, thank me later. Anyway, Stone Tongue. Let's first cast our gaze back to 1991 in Northamptonshire, Britain, where archaeologists discovered a gruesome and even stranger mutilation that emerged from the remains of Roman Britain. Now, it's no hidden secret that Britain is littered with instances of intrigue from the Roman occupation of Britain, but this one in particular seemingly doesn't fit any sort of logic, or any of the many other mysteries of ancient Britain. At the bottom of a burial pit, buried beneath dozens of other bodies, archaeologists found the skeleton of a man whose tongue had apparently been amputated and instead replaced with a flat stone wedged into his mouth. The burial site at Stanwick near the River Nene dates back from between the 3rd or 4th centuries, where people in Roman Britain would have congregated in small farming communities. Now, it's certainly not rare to find makeshift burial pits in Roman Britain. In fact, they are a dime a dozen. But the strange thing was, this guy was buried at the bottom, face down. And not only was he buried face down, which would usually indicate some sort of fear of him by the community, but his tongue was cut out and replaced with a stone. As researchers noted, this was something that just hasn't ever been identified as a practice so far in archaeological records. There are no other known occurrences of this ever happening in Roman Britain, so far anyway. And the fact that this was on top of the matter of him being buried face down, well, who the hell was he? What was he doing? It is believed that the man would have been in his 30s at the time of his death, and one theory is that he had mental health issues and was actually responsible for severing his own tongue. Perhaps the tongue was the community symbolically making him whole again, but then why was he buried face down? Now, archaeologists are currently trying to correlate this practice to ancient Germanic laws, but its place in a small farming community in Roman Britain, yeah, that remains a complete and utter mystery. Swinging in at number 4, Cat Shabib. And I absolutely love this one, as well as pretty much all of the next few entries, because nothing gets my mind whirring quite like an ancient structure that no one knows what the hell it is, or what it was doing, or why it was even there. Let me introduce you to the Cat Shabib, an ancient wall in southern Jordan that, since its identification by British diplomat Sir Alec Kirkbride back in 1948, has had archaeologists scratching their heads ever since. I say identification because Kirkbride certainly didn't discover this structure per se, but instead he noticed that whilst he was flying over Jordan, there was a very apparent and very clear line across the geographical landscape. A wall, in fact, that ran 150 kilometers, making it the longest linear archaeological site in Jordan. Now, why would anyone build a wall of such length? Now, the Romans had reason to with the Picts, ancient China had reason to with Genghis Khan, but Cat Shabib? What's that all about? The thing is though, whilst the purpose of this wall is the frantic subject of debate, we do know who built it. The semi-nomadic Bedouin people led by the Arab prince Amir Shabib. Historically, there is a certain recognition of the Bedouin people using the wall, but there is still no concrete evidence to determine its purpose. Archaeologists during the 1940s and 1950s argued that the Cat Shabib was used for military and defense purposes. However, there is a clear problem with that assumption. This wall is far too low for it to have ever been a successful defensive mechanism, and although it is massive in length, at best estimates it stood at around just 1.5 meters high. What was it keeping out? Not a lot. So then why have archaeologists also discovered over 100 ruined towers across its span? Yeah, more and more questions. Oh, and also, did I mention that best estimates point toward it being built in the Iron Age? Yeah, catch Shabib everybody. A complete and utter mystery. Next up at number 3, the Golan Structure. Alright guys, if Cat Shabib had you scratching your head, then the Golan Structure is going to require some form of head scratching machinery. Let me introduce you to the Golan Structure, also known as Rajum el-Hiri, an ancient megalithic monument that resides in the Israeli-occupied portion of Golan Heights, just off of the east coast of the Sea of Galilee. Made up of more than 42,000 basalt rocks arranged in concentric circles with a mound that is 15 foot tall at its centre, the Golan Structure has often been referred to as the Stonehenge of the Levant. Why? Well, of course, because it dates back to at least the early Bronze Age to between 3000 and 2700 BCE. So what is it? Who built it? What purpose did it serve? Yeah, that'll be a we don't have a freaking clue on pretty much all of those points. The outermost wall of this structure is 520 feet in diameter and 8 feet high, and since archaeological excavations have thus far yielded very few material remains, most Israeli archaeologists believe that this site was certainly not of a defensive position or a residential quarter, but most likely, as the vast majority of these enigmas are, it was a ritual centre. And not only that, but a ritual centre that is possibly linked to the cult of the dead. But on that note, there's even more of a mystery, because so far no human remains have ever been found at the site, only objects pointing to its function as some kind of tomb. And also, hold on to your hats guys, because this is where it gets weirder. At the centre of the Golan Structure, the actual entrance to a tomb was discovered, one that during the June and December solstices, its axis is perfectly aligned with. Yeah. More questions, fewer answers. The thing is though, as its namesake as the Stonehenge of the Levant, no other structures of its kind have ever been discovered, which is even more of a head scratcher considering the fact that in ancient Britain as well as in South America, structures like this are pretty common. Some believe that its purpose was to worship Tammuz and Ishtar, the ancient Mesopotamian fertility gods. Others suggest that it was used by the Dakmas of the Zoroastrians to lay out their dead and let the birds remove the flesh from their bones. Some say that it was a calendar or a site to observe the constellations for religious calculations. Maybe it was all of these things at some point in time, but as it remains, we may never know. Coming in at number 2, the Great Lakes Copper Mystery. Oh boy, here we go. If you're not already feeling perplexed at the mysteries of the ancient world, then I'm fairly certain that this one will knock your metaphorical socks off. In the wilds of Michigan's Isle Royal National Park, it remains a beautiful and remote location, but thousands of years ago, the island was home to a thriving mining industry. Yes, mining. The rich veins of copper that ripple through the site's bedrock certainly drew the attention of the early Native Americans, and the fact that they diligently used this ore to make tools and jewelry is evident still. But the actual extent of their operation remains a complete and utter mystery. Why? Well, because around 6,500 years ago, there is clear and startling evidence to suggest that roughly 500,000 tons of copper was mined from the land. 500,000 tons of copper, which simply put is a staggering amount. Now, the copper culture complex is an astounding feat of ancient civilization regardless, but here is where our mystery takes another turn. You know why? Because Michigan copper is some of the purest copper on the planet. Keep that thought in mind. And 500,000 tons of it, well frankly put, there should be more evidence to its use throughout the Midwest. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a leap here, and I'm going to point us toward another ancient mystery, one that occurred off the coast of Turkey roughly around the 14th century BC. A shipwreck that was discovered just off the east shore of Uluburun, discovered by a sponge diver back in 1982. Now the Uluburun shipwreck is a bit of a mystery in and of itself, but it's with the content of its cargo that we're concerned with here. Within the hull of the shipwreck, over 10 tons of copper oxide ingots were discovered. Now, oxide ingots, which are named so down to the fact that they are shaped with rectangular handholds on either side, were relatively common in the late Bronze Age period of the Mediterranean Sea. You know what is weird? Testing on these ingots later discovered that they were extraordinarily pure for others of its kind. In fact, more than 99.5% pure. The oxides themselves were brittle blister copper with voids and slag bits that only occur when multiple pourings were made outdoors over wood fires. There is only one type of ore of this purity, Michigan copper, the kind mined over 6,500 years ago in the copper culture complex of North America. Yeah, beats me guys. And finally coming in at number 1 spot, the Nest of Broar. And I absolutely adore this particular Neolithic mystery, and at the moment this is pretty much my direct inspiration for scholarly study of the ancient world. Now, we've covered this area quite a few times on this channel, and if you'd like to find out more about places like Skara Brae, the ancient site discovered on the Orkney Isles of northern Scotland, then please check out our Scottish history list, and also, you know, do your own discovering, because Neolithic Orkney is absolutely amazing. But there's another place that is even more remarkable than Skara Brae, the Nest of Broar, perhaps one of the most important discoveries in archaeological record depicting just what the hell was going on during the Neolithic period of ancient Britain. Now, back in 2003, in a site that occupies the central position with the Orkney archipelago that lies between the locks of Stenness and Harray, an imposing complex of monuments were discovered, a series of structures that seemingly were of pivotal importance to Neolithic Orcadians, and perhaps even further afield, perhaps even the whole of ancient Britain. The site itself, which lies between the already discovered ring of Brodgar, a Neolithic stone circle that has its own mysteries, as well as the equally mysterious stones of Stenness, dates back to at least 3300 BC. As of 2016, 14 structures have been discovered, with many of them being built on top of each other, suggesting perhaps an even older use of this site and a location of incredible importance to the Neolithic people of ancient Britain. Without a doubt though, the most impressive structure, known as Structure 10, which appears to be a Neolithic pyramid, is even more of a head scratcher. Yeah, I just said Neolithic pyramid. Around this site, which was used prolifically up until around 2200 BCE, after which it abruptly stopped, archaeologists have since discovered the bones of approximately 400 cattle, around which the carcasses of several red deer were placed, with many of their tibia bones being cracked and extracted for marrow, suggesting the site of a feast. Do you know what's weirder though? During this event, there is also evidence of the temple being largely destroyed, brick by brick. Seemingly, for some reason, the Neolithic Orcadians built this site as a place of incredible importance, used it for 1,000 years, and then one day threw a party and tore the whole thing down. I have no idea, guys, but most importantly, I want to know. Kicking off at number 5, Seti. And this is an incredibly interesting case, because if the implications are true, then it exists in 2 separate timelines. Both the early 20th century and, believe it or not, in late 1200 BC. Let me explain. On January 16th, 1904, a girl by the name of Dorothy Eady was born in the London suburb of Blackheath to 2 Irish middle-class parents, Reuben Eady, a master tailor, and her mother, Caroline Eady. At the age of 3, Dorothy suffered a terrible fall from a flight of stairs that by all rights should have killed her, but after she had recovered in hospital, in the years that followed, she started to exhibit strange behaviours. She suddenly had developed a keen interest in ancient Egypt, and began talking in a strange, otherworldly accent. At Catholic school, she was thrown out for declaring her love for Osiris and her longing to return to what she referred to as the old religion. After being taken by her parents to the British Museum, she saw a photograph of the New Kingdom Temple and loudly declared, "This is my home, but where are all the trees? Where is the garden?" It turned out that the photograph was the temple of Seti I, the father of Ramses the Great. Dorothy became transfixed with the museum and would visit every day, claiming that she was back amongst her peoples. In her later life, she would become heavily involved in the study of Egyptology, where she moved to Cairo and changed her name to Seti. This is where it gets crazy, because she then claimed that over a 12-month period, she was visited by an apparition known as Hor-Ra. In perfect hieroglyphics, she wrote a 70-page text dictating her former life as a priestess at the Temple of Seti. And despite pretty much every attempt to trip her up, her story was terrifyingly accurate. So much so that the garden that she claimed existed as a child turned out actually did. She led archaeologists to a site in the temple ruins, and excavations uncovered a garden that perfectly matched her descriptions. Pretty spooky, right? Next up at number 4, the Antikythera mechanism. If you know anything about the legendary Antikythera mechanism, then you'll know that it's pretty much baffled scientists since its discovery way back in 1901. Now, it may look like some kind of weird piece of ancient metal, but the real kicker is that the Antikythera mechanism appears to be the first instance of an analog computer that, get this, potentially dates back to 200 BC. It was found amongst the wreckage retrieved off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera, and it is believed to have been designed and constructed by ancient Greek scientists. But what exactly were the ancient Greeks doing with a clockwork computer? Well, it appears that they may have been scanning the stars. The device itself is a series of complex clockwork mechanisms comprised of at least 30 meshing bronze gears. Now, detailed imaging of the mechanism suggests that it had 37 gear wheels that enabled it to follow the movements of the moon and sun throughout the zodiac and could predict eclipses to pinpoint accuracy and even model the irregular orbit of our moon. What is absolutely crazy about the Antikythera mechanism is that the knowledge of this technology was evidently lost at some point in antiquity, and anything even remotely correlating to its design didn't appear again until the development of mechanical astronomical clocks in Europe in, get this, the 14th century. It is living proof that our ancient ancestors had a much more capable grasp on the mysteries of our existence than anyone has ever expected. If only the Library of Alexandria hadn't burned down, eh? Swinging in at number 3, the Amber Room. Now, as far as ancient mysteries go, this one is perhaps the most recent, although the design and creation of the mysterious Amber Room dates back to the early 17th century. Now, the precious gemstone of amber has enthralled Europeans for countless generations, and in particular the Russian aristocracy, so much so that in 1716 Peter the Great was gifted an entire room built out of the stuff to celebrate the peace between Russia and Prussia. It was originally installed at the Charlottenburg Palace, home of Frederick I, the first king of Prussia, and Peter the Great loved it so much that Friedrich was like, "You can have it, bud, we're friends now." The room consisted of 180 square feet of pure decadence, glowing with over 6 tons of amber, which were backed with panels upon panels of gold leaf. Today, historians estimate that the original Amber Room would have been worth over $142 million, and is often considered to be the 8th wonder of the world. So, where is it? Well, of course, in 1941, Adolf Hitler initiated Operation Barbarossa, and 3 million German soldiers ravaged their way into the Soviet Union. Inevitably, the Amber Room was seized, tore down by German troops, packed up into 27 crates, and shipped back to Germany, where it was on display at Königsberg Castle until 1943. But in the final months of that year, the end of the war was in sight, and the Amber Room was dismantled, ready to ship away in case the castle was destroyed by Allied forces. That's where the case goes cold, and the trail of the Amber Room was lost to history. Some say that the Amber Room is still hidden within the ruins of the castle, others believe it to have been straight up destroyed in the bombings. There are those that claim it was loaded onto a ship and can be found somewhere at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The truth remains that we may never know, but it's one of history's most mysterious treasures. Next up at number 2, the Fall of Angkor Wat. Now, the fall of the Khmer Empire, a highly advanced state-level society that proliferated in mainland Southeast Asia between the 9th and 15th centuries AD, has puzzled both archaeologists and historians for decades, culminating in the majestic ruins of its capital city, Angkor Wat. The Khmer Empire were incredibly advanced for their time and were noted for their enormous monumental architecture and their extensive trade partnership between India, China, and the rest of the world. They had a massive road system, evidence of advanced agricultural technology, and were most of all famous for their highly complex hydrological system that took advantage of the region's monsoonal complex, efficiently carving out a civilization in a tropical rainforest. Now, the traditional date for the empire's collapse is 1431, when Angkor Wat was sacked by the rival kingdom of Siam. But the reality of it is, no one really knows. Seemingly, while evidence suggests pockets of the empire remained, for the most part, they just disappeared. However, there may be an equally terrifying reason for their demise. Angkor Wat was constructed as a hydraulic city. It was a demonstration of ingenious technology that harnessed water and flow from the Siem Reap River in a highly advanced manner. But one of the leading theories of Angkor Wat's demise is suggestive evidence of a massive flood. Now, a flood of such stature doesn't seem to appear in any recorded annals of the time, but evidence of extensive water damage to the masonry is the only clue that historians have. Flash flood? Yeah, more than likely, but what caused it? That's anyone's guess. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Bini Road. And talking of water, our final entry is completely submerged in the stuff, as in it lies at the bottom of the ocean bed just off the coast of the Bahamas. And what is it? Well, it's a road seemingly constructed from sub-rectangular limestone blocks that spans half a mile, 18 feet below the water. Yeah, and what's it doing there? Well, you bet. no one has a clue, as in really no one has any idea how it got there or even what it is, despite over 50 years of extensive research. The Bini Road has been examined by geologists, archaeologists of all kind, anthropologists, marine engineers, pretty much anyone and everyone with any ancient underwater credibility, all of which have shrugged their shoulders at any reasonable explanation. Well, first off, how old is it? Again, no one knows, despite irregularities in carbon dating from various other materials from the area, which has split researchers into two camps: proponents of the road being man-made and those that believe it is a natural geological occurrence. Now, usually geologists are pretty damn good at pinpointing the age of any given mineral, but not with the Bini Road, as carbon datings have varied widely from being 1500, 3000 and 15,000 years old. Listen guys, there are so many potential consequences to the implications of the Bini Road. It could just be nothing at all, a weird freak collection of rocks, but it also could be evidence of a larger settlement long lost to the deep blue sea, and the fact that numerous credible researchers from both camps can't come to an agreement is reason enough to give the Bini Road some kind of thought. Well, I'll leave this one in your hands, horror fans. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. The Bini Road, man. What is it? Kicking off at number 5, the Lost Roman Legion. A mystery that has baffled Roman historians for eons. The Legio IX Hispania, or the 9th Legion, also commonly known as the Lost Legion, was one of the most renowned fighting forces of the Roman Empire that existed from the 1st century BC until at least 120 AD. They collected countless battles and victories across the Empire's influence, participating in the Siege of Asculum in 90 BC, as well as fighting ferociously beside Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium. Following the assassination of Caesar, they were one of the Senate's most powerful military tools and battled the Cantabrians of Spain as well as the Germanic tribes of the Rhine borderlands. And after that, their successes led them to Britain, where they participated in the Roman invasion led by Emperor Claudius, and it is thought that they were stationed there all the way until 120 AD. And then they disappeared completely, seemingly fell off the face of the earth. Now, the Romans were incredibly diligent record keepers. It's why we know so much about them and why they made extensive records of every military battle and confrontation, even their losses, so they could better develop their imperial machine. And the 9th Legion, after seemingly heading to Scotland to fight the Picts and Celtic tribes, just disappeared. No notes, no records, nothing. Now, the Lost Legion was made up of over 5,000 men, and somehow, in the strange mists of time, they all completely disappeared. I guess we'll never know. Coming in at number 4, the Sky Caves of Nepal. Also known as the Mustang Caves, the Sky Caves of Nepal are a collection of over 10,000 man-made caves dug deep into the sides of the Himalayan Valley in the Mustang district of Nepal. This place has absolutely baffled archaeologists and researchers since their discovery in the mid-90s, when local explorers began venturing inside the stacked caves and found several dozen partially mummified human bodies, all at least between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Further exploration of these caves has led to discoveries of valuable Buddhist paintings, sculptures, manuscripts and numerous ancient artifacts that is thought to belong to the 12th and 14th century. But the fact that the Sky Caves seem to predate them by over at the least 2,000 years has offered no answer to the burning question: who built these caves and why? Since 1996, the Sky Caves of Nepal have been listed as a UNESCO tentative site, and the Mustang region was formerly known as the Kingdom of Lo until its annexation by Nepal at the end of the 18th century. This in turn made it a restricted demilitarized area until 1992, making it one of the most preserved and isolated regions on the planet. Seemingly, whoever was making these caves have been there for at least 3,000 years, burying their dead in elaborate ritualistic ceremonial sky tombs, and no one has any idea why. Swinging in at number 3, the Ridgeway Hill Viking Burial Pit. And this one is so heavy metal that I have no idea. It could literally make up the plot of a Clive Barker film. In September 2008, archaeologists from Oxford Archaeology began excavating along the route of the A354 when they discovered a burial pit on nearby Ridgeway Hill containing the bodies of what appeared to be 54 Viking mercenaries. And all of them were decapitated. Not only were they all decapitated though, but when their remains were discovered, it was found that they were all in relatively neat little piles. Their heads in one pile, their torsos in another, like some kind of ancient hunting grounds visitor attraction. Researchers are stumped about the Ridgeway Hill pit. There are no leading theories, and the vast majority of it just doesn't make sense. Carbon dating found that their remains dated back to between 970 and 1025 AD, and they were all of Scandinavian origin and carried the physiques of warriors. One leading theory is that the group was somehow ambushed by nearby villagers and ceremoniously slaughtered, but that makes zero sense and has no ties to the known ritualistic practices of the native Britons. Also, markings on the Vikings' bones show that the method of execution was a bizarre mix of crude and incredibly precise blows, and there was a total of 188 wounds visible on the skeletons, an average of 4 per Viking, one of which had the top of his skull sliced off, exposing his brain. Vampiric blood ritual, ancient cult sacrifice, I have no idea, but the Ridgeway Hill pit doesn't make any sense at all. Next up at number 2, Göbekli Tepe. And to be honest, I could talk about Göbekli Tepe all day, because what the hell is going down in that place, we'll maybe never know. Göbekli Tepe, which is Turkish for Potbelly Hill, is an ancient megalithic site that was evidently used for social ritualistic practices. Oh, and also, it dates back to the 10th millennium BC. At the least. Just look at this place and you'll understand exactly why this is so insanely baffling. During a time which most anthropologists agree we as humans were primitive hunter-gatherers. But nah, Göbekli Tepe seems to say otherwise, with the structure itself making up patterns of absolutely massive T-shaped stone pillars, more than 200 of them, which form around 20 separate circles and are currently the world's oldest known megaliths, older than Stonehenge. Do you know the kind of ingenuity it takes to build a structure like that? So during a time when mankind was seemingly roaming the plains hunting mammoths, we were actually building incomprehensibly vast structures. Klaus Schmidt, who was a leading German archaeologist, held the belief that Göbekli Tepe was a vastly important pilgrimage destination and a somewhat cathedral for a primitive cult of the dead. Though no tombs or graves have ever been found at the site, Schmidt believed that they remained to be discovered, hidden in niches located behind the temple walls. It's important to note that the vast majority of Göbekli Tepe is yet to be unearthed, and mainstream archaeology has primarily ignored this site. For all intents and purposes, it may be one of the most important ancient structures of our species. As Ian Hodder of Stanford University says, Göbekli Tepe changes everything. And finally, our number 1 spot, the Sphinx. And bear with me, because there is one ancient structure that is beyond baffling: the Sphinx and the perpetual mystery that surrounds it. Now, I'm a stickler for science, but there is something about the Great Sphinx of Giza that just doesn't add up. Now, hear me out, because the vast majority of Egyptologists claim that the Sphinx is 4,512 years old, which would have meant it was built in the year 2494 BC. But that completely ignores the fact that there are certain very clear weathering patterns on the Sphinx that do not occur in any other ancient structures in the area, the Great Pyramids included. Author John Anthony West, alongside geologist Robert M. Shoke, found very clear evidence of water erosion on the structure, which is not consistent of the environmental climate patterns of the given time. These patterns and the effect of water erosion would be consistent in a time when Egypt was a wet and rainy landscape, meaning that the Sphinx would have had to be between 7,000 and 10,000 years old. On another note, between 1991 and 1993, when West's team were examining the Sphinx, they found evidence of hollow, regularly shaped spaces and chambers between the pores and at either side of the structure. Egyptologists completely put an end to their examination and forbid any other work. The mysteries of the Sphinx are countless, and one thing is for certain: they're not being fully explored by modern research. Well, what do you guys think about the mystery of the Sphinx? Let us know in the comment box down below. I know you will.
Number 5. Timur the Conqueror. Timur the Conqueror was a 14th century conqueror and founder of the Timurid Empire. And according to the legend's inscriptions on his tomb, there was a warning of calamity for anyone who dares disturb his remains. And I would also just take this moment as a general rule of thumb: you shouldn't disturb anyone's tomb. anyone at all. It doesn't matter if they were a famous conqueror or just like a milkman or something, you know? But definitely don't disturb famous conquerors who have ancient curses placed upon them. Mikhail Gerasimov was a Soviet scientist and wanted to dig up the conqueror, not for personal gain or to rob his tomb for loot, but rather to reconstruct his face, as he was a pioneer of paleoanthropology, which is a very fancy schmancy word for reconstructing the dead, making 3D models of their faces and stuff, so we have an idea of what historical figures look like. It's really cool tech. Now, it should be stated, several religious leaders in Uzbekistan warned him against digging up Timur. There was 2 consecutive warnings in the tomb itself. The first, plain sight, said, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Now that probably should have been enough to discourage the trick, but if you keep pushing forward, the second inscription read, "Whomever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Well, who's gonna take that seriously? Well, 3 days after the excavation of Timur's tomb, a certain troublesome Austrian failed art student and a certain group of German National Socialists invaded Russia in Operation Barbarossa, which I think we could make a strong argument was a more terrible invader. In 1942, Timur's body was returned and buried with proper Islamic rites, and the Battle of Stalingrad in the same year marked a major turning point for Russia in the course of World War II. Coincidence perhaps? Or was this evidence of an ancient curse being reversed? I feel like that's gotta be one of the first times you hear of a curse getting undone. And if you're looking for way more videos about scary curses, well, you already know the Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. And you better subscribe or I'm gonna curse you. No, don't worry. No curses at all, just a little joke. But do make sure you hit subscribe, ring that little bell so you don't miss any of our videos, but if you'd be so kind, do it at the end of this video, because I got 4 more cursed tombs coming up for you right now. Number 3, Tyrano Masakado. We're headed out to Japan for our next entry on this list. The number 3 entry is going to be the grave of Tyrano Masakado, whom is attributed as being Japan's first samurai. Tom Cruise being the last samurai, of course, and the identity of all the samurais in between that, totally unknown, lost to history. Now, the story of Tyrano Masakado is absolutely fascinating, especially if you love Japanese history. He was a samurai who rebelled against the central government in 10th century Japan. He claimed the title of new emperor and led a revolt in the Kanto region. Masakado's rebellion was eventually suppressed and he did fall in battle, but his legend grew over time and he became revered as a folk hero and a symbol of resistance. Masakado's story embodies the struggle against oppressive rule and the enduring spirit of the Japanese people. And enduring spirit, that might have a few more meanings. When the Ministry of Finance burned down during an earthquake in 1923, the at the time superstitious Japanese emperor blamed Masakado, who had been dead for 1,000 years at this point, so probably not directly involved, but a ghostly curse maybe. The grave superstition actually extended outside of Japan. When the US was occupying Japan in 1945, they refused to go anywhere near Masakado's final resting place. A bank was erected where the shrine was, and a few years after it was built, the branch declared bankruptcy, funny enough. In a last-ditch attempt to save their bank and appease the spirit, they opened an account for Masakado. It didn't help much, and probably just offended him more when he saw that his bank account was empty. These days, there's a small garden dedicated to Masakado's memory, where you're invited to come pay homage and respect to Japan's first samurai, but if I was you, I would avoid building anything there at all. Maybe just take a few pictures, sit on a bench, and say something nice to him. Number 2, Shakespeare's Grave. Who's the most famous writer of all time? You could probably make a very strong case that it's William Shakespeare, the beloved playwright and nemesis of high schoolers. All his characters are household names, and his plays have been played over and over and over and over around the world. There's probably much ado about nothing happening in a park near your house right now. You probably wouldn't think of an esteemed playwright from the 16th century in England to be someone you would hear about on a list of cursed tombs. But would you believe that Shakespeare's grave is said to be cursed? I hope you believe it, because it's true. Now, Shakespeare's own name isn't on the tomb. Shakespeare's own name isn't on the tomb, according to Reuters, but the inscription on his grave definitely bears mentioning. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. Thank you. I did Statford for a few years. Yeah, thank you. It's no big deal. It's no big deal, guys. The warning worked. Buildings constructing repairs in 2008 went out of their way to avoid the gravesite at all, but not everyone would heed the bard's curse. According to an archaeologist, Kevin Coles, there is reason to believe that at some point in time, for unknown reasons, somebody dug up Shakespeare and took his skull. Alas, poor Shakespeare. I knew him well. That was from Hamlet. That's one of the plays that he wrote. There's been a lot of debate and wonder even why Shakespeare's name isn't inscripted on the grave. He's the only grave in the plot without a name, and he's a particularly famous grave. There are some who suspect that Shakespeare himself wrote the epitaph, which is pretty funny and in line with him, I think. But I don't know if that's entirely true, mostly because the epitaph was very, very easy to understand, and I didn't need to translate it on the bottom of the page like most of Shakespeare's work. Beit She'arim, Israel. You know, I joke around the office that it can be pretty tricky writing top 5 scary videos sometimes. Because of all the channels that we have, there's not a lot of new developments in the world of scary. You know? There's not a lot of new ancient folklore, there's not a lot of new haunted places, and there's not a lot of new cursed tombs being made. Well, they're not being made, they should be. But they are being discovered. I guess they could still get made too, there's still time. A recently uncovered tomb was discovered within a recently unearthed cave in an ancient cemetery in Beit She'arim, Israel. Would you believe this is the first tomb that has been found there in 65 years? Now, the archaeologists termed the tomb significant because it was the first time ever that a tomb has identified a dead person as converting to Judaism. The tomb had a strange message scrawled in ominous red writing reading, Yaakov Hagar vows to curse anybody who would open this grave, so nobody will open it. 60 years old. Yaakov Hagar translates to Jacob the proselyte, which means a convert to Judaism. No one knows exactly who wrote this inscription. An archaeologist from the University of Haifa said the message was inscribed to ensure the resting place of the dead remained undisturbed. It was to prevent others from opening the tomb at a later point, which happened quite often. Reusing tombs through time, said Adi Ulrich, the archaeologist. Totally can sympathize with that. When I was younger, I had to share my room with my siblings, had to share a bunk bed. I wouldn't want to share a tomb. I'd want a tomb all to myself. Ulrich also said that the inscription is from the late Roman or early Byzantine period, a time when Christianity was strengthened. And here we find evidence that there were still people who chose willingly to join the Jewish people. That's an interesting thing to find on a tombstone. And currently, as of this writing, it has yet to curse anyone too much, but also they didn't disturb it too much. So let's just hope they keep some of those stones where they are and they can keep those curses underground. Number 4, the Voic Manuscript. The manuscript is one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries out there, just for how sheer little we know about it. We have nothing. It's kind of a choose your own adventure for mysteries. Is it aliens? Demons? A really convoluted historical prank? If you don't know, the Voic Manuscript is a strange document written in a handwritten text filled with bizarre illustrations. No one's been able to make sense of it, primarily because it's written in a language that has never been seen elsewhere in human history. It was named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish antiquarian who purchased it in 1912, although its ownership has passed through many hands. So what was it written for, and by who? These are the questions we've been asking, and we're probably going to keep asking over and over. The manuscript is about 240 pages, containing illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, humanoid figures, and other strange objects. Despite countless attempts by cryptographers, no one's been able to crack the code just yet. Some speculation has been made that it could be a biology textbook in an encoded language. Some people think it could be the scrawlings of a brilliant alchemist, magic and spell casting we couldn't possibly hope to understand. Some say it's from a forgotten civilization, while others have said maybe it's all just a load of nonsense and is just made by someone who had too much time on their hands and a vengeance against historians who wanted to prank them for centuries. The book is thought to have come from anywhere between the 15th century and the 17th century. We don't even know when this thing was written. Like I said, we know next to nothing about it. Now, if you're feeling clever and inspired, you can find a PDF of the Voic Manuscript as a free download pretty easily. Who knows? You might be the one to finally crack this case. But hey, don't be frustrated if you end up falling down a conspiracy rabbit hole many before you have tried. I looked through a few of these pages and it took me 30 seconds before I was looking like Charlie from Always Sunny at the conspiracy wall, all that red tape and stuff. Number 3, the Yonaguni Monument. You've heard of the lost city of Atlantis? Surely. Of course you have. It's one of the best Disney movies you forgot about. That's a story for a whole other video. Well, what if it wasn't the only lost underwater city out there? Have you ever heard of the Yonaguni Monument? The Yonaguni Monument has sometimes been called Japan's Atlantis, and it refers to a strange, eerie underwater rock formation just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan that has had people scratching their heads for years. It's a massive structure consisting of several flat rock slabs arranged in a way that seems like an intelligent life put it together. Now, some people say that this structure could be completely natural, resulting from years of erosion and tectonic activity. Certainly, stranger things have happened, and it wouldn't be completely impossible for something to form this way, but the way it exists now, the way it sits, it seems deliberately carved out, and it seems like it was an important structure to someone. Perhaps a monument, a temple, some sign of a lost city, hence the Atlantis comparisons. Is it possible this was evidence of a lost civilization buried beneath the ocean waves, forever forgotten to history? The monument being completely submerged has been fuel for the fire of speculation. Was it always underwater? Did it end up there over time? Did the water raise around it? Did the land used to look significantly different? It makes it pretty difficult to study as well, making it just that little bit more elusive, as if it wasn't mysterious enough as is. But let's be real, it was probably aliens. It was almost certainly aliens. Number 2, the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle. Now there's an exquisite ancient mystery, one of the certified classics, something that's eluded us for years and will probably continue to do so. It's been referred to before as the Devil's Triangle, and it's host to all manner of mysterious incidents and unexplained phenomena. One of the more infamous incidents linked to the Bermuda Triangle is the disappearance of Flight 19 in December 1945. 5 Navy bombers vanished during a routine training mission alongside 14 crew members. Gone. Zilch. There was an extensive search effort, but nothing was ever found. Not so much as a bolt off the hull, a boot fished up, a hat, nothing. It was as if they were swallowed up by the void. Naturally, people went a bit wild with theories on this one. Anything from aliens, electromagnetic anomalies, alternate realities, no clipping into the back room. You know, pretty serious academic stuff. But it's bizarre. Another particularly good Bermuda baffler for you is the case of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the 542-foot-long cargo ship carrying over 300 crew members vanished during its voyage from Barbados. No wreckage, no survivors ever found. Certainly you would think a ship that big with that many people would leave behind a little bit of evidence, right? What happened? Were they swallowed up by the very seas themselves, pulled to Davy Jones's locker by the Kraken? Or are they somewhere we can't reach them, in a place between worlds and time? The region is known for all sorts of weird stuff too, involving electronic malfunctions and compass deviations. It makes it seem like there is just something bad in the air out there. Maybe just bad vibes? Certainly seems that way. And number 1, the Dorset Mass Grave. Oh, this one is a doozy, and it is one of the scariest and most confusing archaeological discoveries ever found. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? A barrel of Vikings? Well, how about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies? No? Well, you and I find different things fun, I suppose. Way back in the yesteryear of 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find, you know, if they came across an old coin or an old arrowhead or something you can stuff in a museum case. For the first few days of the job, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy discovered until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess they thought that was probably kind of interesting. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that'd be one thing. But the mass grave was wrapped in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well their rib cages, arms, and leg bones were all scattered around, this is disgusting, surrounded by discarded teeth. No clothes or weaponry was recovered. So what in the Allfather's name happened here? Because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. Sounds like Vikings opened up a portal to hell, went really wild with it. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly, which is very interesting. Now, it goes without saying that Viking dental surgery could not have been painless, meaning the process had to be extremely excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or done to themselves to intimidate their opponents to show just how gritty they are. I actually don't know which of those two are preferable. They actually both sound pretty horrible. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a portal to hell and being offered as a sacrifice is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that by looking at the wound patterns on the ribs and torso, they were surgical, precise blows, which wasn't really the kind of thing you'd expect from a rabid Viking warrior flailing around a sword in a brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifyingly sadistic ritual, or it was a big-time mass sentencing where everybody was sentenced to the death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone. These men had been brought here from somewhere else and then left here for a long time. We might never know the truth behind the Dorset mass grave, and I'm gonna be honest, that might be fine with me. Some secrets are better left buried. Anyone else feel though that all those Viking skeletons, that might be like the world's most terrifying puzzle to put all that together? Morbid thought, and that's something to end the video on.
Number 5, an ancient fortress. Outside the old Inca capital of Cusco, a fortress called Sacsayhuaman is hanging out in the Peruvian Andes. Built from enormous stones that have been chiseled and stacked together like a jigsaw puzzle, some say this fortress could be the work of an ancient civilization that had help from interstellar friends. The 1,000-year-old interlocking fortress walls are made of rocks that weigh as much as 360 tons each, and which were carried more than 20 miles before being lifted and fit into place with laser-like precision. How an ancient culture accomplished such a feat of engineering is a fun little problem to solve. Turns out the Inca were as adept at building houses and fortified complexes as they were as watching the sky and keeping calendars. As a matter of fact, this fortress isn't the only example of this intricate masonry. Similar walls exist throughout the Inca Empire, including one in Cusco where a 12-angled stone has been carefully wedged into place. Something I'll bring up a lot today is that the marvels of ancient architecture just can't be explained by what we know about history. Sure, by modern standards some of it can be explained, but our technology had to evolve to that point first. The only way it can make sense in history is if we got help from a more advanced species. Number 4, graffiti inside the Great Pyramids. In the heart of the city of El Giza stands the Giza Pyramid Complex, also known as the Necropolis. This architectural marvel contains 3 pyramids: the Pyramid of Khafre, the Pyramid of Menkaure, and of course the Great Pyramid of Giza. Although each was created for a different pharaoh, many historians are convinced that their collective design is cohesive and intentional, as the arrangement of these structures is possibly a representation of the Orion constellation. The complex's crown jewel, though, is the Great Pyramid. Most believe it was erected under the watchful eye of the pharaoh Khufu to be a tomb where the king would complete his transformation into a god in the afterlife. Standing around 146.7 meters high and stretching 234.4 meters wide, it looms above everything around it. It was assembled from 2.5 million stone blocks, some of which came from over 500 miles away, which is particularly amazing when you consider that they didn't have the use of wheels at the time, and that construction only took 20 years. If that sounds like a lot to anyone, try living in Toronto, where construction takes that long to renovate like a single street. And by the time it's done being renovated, workers take so long they have to do it again. Whoever designed and built the pyramids had incredibly detailed knowledge and architectural skill. When completed, the pyramid towered over the city, and its corners aligned almost exactly with the points of a compass. In general, Egyptians often oriented structures to true north pretty precisely, likely using stars such as Polaris to orient their work, and the Great Pyramid is no exception. The origins and composition of the Great Pyramid, our oldest wonder of the world, and its slightly less famous kin, have long confounded scholars. So, how did engineers manage to achieve these seemingly impossible feats that building these masterpieces would require? Well, the truth is, nobody knows for sure. While some believe that construction workers may have used large ramps to transport the stones, this theory has been largely disproven, as there is little archaeological evidence to support the claim. Naturally, theories arguing that aliens must have constructed the pyramid have come into play. It's true that it would have been difficult for humans to build the pyramids, and there's precious little historical evidence of how they were built. Citing this, as well as the architectural and scientific questions that surround the pyramids, many people, myself included, have proposed that aliens came to Earth in ancient times and helped kickstart civilizations. According to these theories, the aliens were instrumental in helping ancient Egyptians build their masterpieces. Believers like us argue that in order to design the pyramids as they are, one would need a bird's eye view, the kind that could be provided from, say, a flying saucer. They also believe that in order to create an object that obeys the so-called golden ratio, a mathematical relationship based on the special number of feet, the Egyptians would have needed help from outside sources. Hey look, the alien theory has persisted to the present day. In 2001, Russian scientist Dr. Viktor Ivanovich claimed that the KGB had found ancient alien remains inside of the Great Pyramid. Certainly the Great Pyramid's inner network of shafts, passageways, and chambers is so intricate that it's not hard to understand why people believed that some kind of divinity or superintelligence was involved. Also, the only hieroglyphs inside are graffiti, alleged to be left behind by those who worked on the structure as a signature, which only further supports my theory on the aliens only knowing that to communicate with us by. Like time capsules, the pyramids are physical symbols of ancient wisdom. Made of glittering gold limestone and always remaining around a cool 20 degrees centigrade inside, they provide glimpses of an ancient society that once neared the kind of technological intelligence we possess today. Hey, maybe in 2,000 years, historians will speculate about the extraterrestrial origins of our fallen civilization, and by then, they'll be able to consult actual aliens for help. Number 3. Helicopter hieroglyphs. Depictions of modern craft found in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs have been hailed as proof of time travel, and even an advanced alien civilization visiting our ancestors. For folks like us, hieroglyphs appearing to resemble planes and helicopters in artwork done thousands of years ago have been hailed as unequivocal proof that the ancient Egyptians were visited by beings who brought them advanced technology from the future, with many supporters of the theory saying if the ancient civilization was putting helicopters and modern spacecraft in their artwork, then they must have seen them or at least observed images of them, which makes sense to me. The helicopter hieroglyphs is a name given to part of an Egyptian hieroglyph carving from the temple of Seti I at Abydos. They've been interpreted as an out-of-place artifact depicting a helicopter as well as other examples of modern technology. The initial carving was made during the reign, like I said, of Seti I and translates to "He who repulses the 9 enemies of Egypt." It was later filled in with plaster and recarved during the reign of Ramesses II with the title "He who protects Egypt and overthrows the foreign countries." Over time, the plaster has eroded away, leaving both inscriptions partially visible and creating a palimpsest-like effect of overlapping hieroglyphs. As with all dates in ancient Egypt, the actual date of Seti's reign are unclear, and various historians propose different dates, with 1294 BC to 1279 BC and 1290 BC to 1279 BC being the most commonly used by scholars today. Back to the hieroglyphs. So the 3,000-year-old hieroglyphs found in the temple are said to depict a helicopter, plane, and futuristic aircraft among the usual, insects, symbols, and snakes. One popular theory, known as the ancient aliens theory, is that the advanced race who brought details of futuristic technology to the Egyptians were visitors from a far-flung, highly advanced planet, visiting to share their knowledge with the primitive communities here on Earth. The beliefs claim that these extraterrestrials were the ones behind the development of the pyramids, Stonehenge, and other famous monuments. And this wasn't the first, nor the last time I will be talking about that today. Steve Mera is a UFOologist who tours the country giving talks on the research he conducts. And at UFO conferences, he produces the helicopter hieroglyphs as part of the debate. During one specific talk in Warminster, Wiltshire, he pointed out the helicopter, describing how it has what looks like a rotor blade and a rudder, also possibly a wing. Look, they had to have the visual from somewhere. Just saying. Number 2, Stonehenge. So the mystery of Stonehenge has baffled historians for centuries. One of the never-ending questions about the ancient site is whether or not it contains hieroglyphics. And in 2015, a scientific paper was published by a mathematician, Dr. A.E. Zlobin, in the form of a diary. He discovered ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs in Stonehenge and determined the site as the solar Egyptian temple of the god Atum. However, there are several other theories that suggest that the site may have used to record messages or stories. One theory suggests that the stones themselves may have been carved with hieroglyphics, and that theory is based on the fact that many other sites, such as the pyramids of Egypt, were also decorated with such writing. Another theory suggests that the stones may have been used as a giant sundial, with the hieroglyphics acting as a way to record the movements of the sun. So this theory is supported by the fact that Stonehenge is aligned with the movements of the sun and moon. Whatever the true purpose of it is, it's clear that the site was of great importance to the ancient people who built it. Speaking of which, who built that thing, and why did they build it? Nabta Playa, as it is now known, is not easily accessible. It is thought that the stones are among the oldest astronomical alignments of megaliths in the world, and were built by a nomadic society in the early centuries of Stonehenge, and it's possible that they were built by an ancient civilization. Also, the tomb nearby was also only filled with only cattle bones, which is really unusual. My theory, and ergo why it made today's list, is that the anomalies point more towards alien advanced communication instead of isolated humans. Also, there haven't really been signs of human life. Only cattle, like I mentioned before, which supports my theory, and not to sound like a broken record today, but if there's something I can't leave out, where there are hieroglyphs, there are things we as humans can't explain. It furthers my theory that one of the languages aliens can communicate with, and the reason they don't visit more now compared to in history, is because of how much we no longer communicate with them, now that it's not a regularly used language. Stonehenge is thought to have been formed between the ancient Neolithic and Bronze Ages, while the pyramids are thought to have formed during the Iron Age. For those who need more precision, Stonehenge is thought to be around 3,100 years old, while the pyramids are thought to be around 4,500 years old. Just for reference. Number 1, an alien mummy. Another sign that excites supporters of the claim that ancient Egypt was visited by aliens is a mummy discovered in a small pyramid near Senusret II's pyramid. Now, the structure of its skeleton doesn't really resemble that of a human's body. It's a skeletal conundrum made up of perplexing features. So it's only 6 inches tall, but initial estimates of the age of the bones were consistent with someone in the single digits of age. But the face is what looks especially different. The long angular skull with slanted eye sockets and fewer than normal ribs, 10 pairs rather than the normal 12, only really deepen the mystery. The mummy was discovered by Dr. Victor Luback, a retired professor from the University of Pennsylvania. The remains were found surrounded by unusual objects that could not be identified. An anonymous source claimed that the mummy does not originate from Earth, and that it has greatly troubled Egyptian authorities, who want to keep it a secret. According to the source, in life the mummy served as an advisor to the pharaoh Osirunet. Governments refuse to admit the implications that such a discovery has for human history, but they still fail to provide the world with a significant explanation for it. When I tried to learn more about this mummy, most of the links and resources had randomly gone missing and weren't archived anywhere, which tends to be par for the course when the government wants to cover up the truth about anything to do with aliens. I swear one of these days I'm just gonna go missing, and the government will be to blame.
Kicking off at number 5, the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra. Now, the legendary Roman politician and general Marcus Antonius, alongside his kindred spirit Cleopatra, may well be the most notorious lovers in the history of our civilization, and although mountains upon mountains of literature have been written about their star-crossed fate, the real mystery of Antony and Cleopatra came after they had both slipped from this mortal coil. Now, if you know anything about the Roman conquest of Egypt, you'll know that around 30 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were not in the Romans' best books, and a general known as Octavian had waged a long and bloody campaign to bring Cleopatra's reign to an end, which he ultimately won, but sadly for us, that's where the trail runs cold, with no leads as to the two lovers' final resting place. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in antiquity is the exact location of the final burial place of Antony and Cleopatra, but according to several ancient historians, Tonius and Plutarch to name a few, it was recorded that Octavian had permitted the two to be buried together as their surviving children were taken back to Rome to be raised as Roman citizens. There are several leads that their tomb was located somewhere west of Alexandria, but numerous excavations throughout history have proven fruitless. However, they did come close, and between 2008 and 2009, reports of the prestigious Egyptologist Zahi Hawass having found evidence of their fated tomb came to light. Although no concrete evidence has been unearthed, relics and memorial coins of the lovers have been found in small ceremonial tombs, perhaps pointing toward Cleopatra's and Antony's tomb being somewhere in the vicinity. The excavation continues, but whoever stumbles upon the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra will unearth one of history's greatest mysteries. Next up at number 4, the sack of Baltimore. And now, I love this particular entry, partly for its many layers and potential implications, but mainly for the fact that it's a swashbuckling tale of chaos and carnage that seemingly came out of nowhere. On June 20th, 1631, a small village named Baltimore in West Cork of Ireland was randomly and viciously attacked by pirates. Not just any pirates though, but pirates from the Barbary coast of North Africa, which at the time was synonymous with the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you couldn't tell, that's quite a distance. This incident would go down as the largest attack by Barbary pirates in both Ireland and Great Britain, and seemingly the target was a tiny village tucked in the corner of the Emerald Isle. So it posed the glaring question, why? Was it just a random chance of opportunity after the pirates had drifted off course? Perhaps, but it's not likely. See, the attack was led by a Dutch captain by the name of Jan Jansvoon van Haarlem, who had changed his name to Murad Rees the Younger, which, if you can't tell, is a bit of a curveball. But that curveball may have actually been thrown by someone else entirely. You see, despite being a small village, Baltimore was actually in the middle of a power play. At the time, it was under the control of a Gaelic chieftain, Sir Finian O'Driscoll, but the nearby English colony of Cork, led by a man named Sir Walter Coppinger, also had Baltimore in his sights. History is unclear as to who pulled which string, but all signs point toward the bizarre pirate attack being orchestrated by someone else entirely, in the hopes of seizing power away from O'Driscoll. In fact, several texts have even suggested that O'Driscoll's own relatives may have orchestrated the move, as they'd been exiled to Spain following defeat at the Battle of Kinsale. Whoever did it overestimated the bloodthirst of the Barbary pirates though, because following the raid, Baltimore was virtually deserted for several generations. The best laid plans of mice and men, You know what they say. Coming up next at number 3, St. John's Dance. And you may have heard mention of this one before, but perhaps not in this context. You see, it's important that we note that in modern times, St. John's Dance or St. Vitus's Dance is a terrible disease also known as Sydenham's chorea that affects the nervous system and results in a series of hysterical jerking movements of the limbs often exhibited in young children. Generally speaking, it isn't infectious, but that doesn't figure to explain the countless records of mass hysterical dancing that occurred throughout history, of literally thousands of people across Europe being afflicted by a manic need to dance. The earliest known outbreak occurred in the 7th century and was primarily thought to occur during times of intense hardship, particularly affecting the peasant and working classes. So what? You're a peasant in Dark Age Europe and all of a sudden you just start dancing and can't stop, somehow infecting the rest of your village, town or city until there's a horde of people doing the exact same thing, potentially collapsing from exhaustion or dying from a heart attack. Well, yeah, because that's exactly what happened. One of the most well-documented cases was in 1518 in the Austrian city of Strasbourg, where a woman named Frau Troffia began dancing in the streets, and within a month 400 people had joined her. Yeah, she danced for a month and loads of people died. Now there are many theories on the true explanation of St. John's Dance, and scholars still argue as to whether it truly was a real contagious disease or merely a social phenomenon. One of those theories suggests a particular fungi had infected their crops, and another suggests that it was all a misunderstanding and St. John's Dance was actually the practice of some secretive European cult. Yeah. Beats me, guys. Swinging in at number 2, the remains of Richard III. And this one, strangely enough, is the perfect blend of ancient mystery and potentially contemporary unexplainable intrigue. Because that's exactly what you all came for, right? Also, I mean, this one is already pretty much solved, but it's in the details where its mystery truly shines. We all know Richard III, right? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. But well, apparently this woman, Scottish author and historian Philippa Langley, knew him a little bit better than anyone else did. Now, it's important to note that history had long forgotten the final resting place of Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, and after his defeat at the Battle of Bosworth, his remains were scattered to the winds of history. After all, history is written by the winners. Well, let's fast forward to modern times when in September 2012, Philippa Langley led an excavation of a car park in Leicester city centre. A few signs pointed toward it potentially being the ruined remains of Greyfriars Church, but in the words of Langley, she had a strange feeling, one that she couldn't quite place, and something was telling her that Richard III was buried beneath that very car park. Now, the dig team was on a very tight budget and only had one chance at excavating a tiny portion of the car park. And guess what? The exact place that Philippa Langley had a strange feeling about turned out to be the final resting place of Richard III's remains. And not only that, but the parking space that he was buried beneath was marked with a large painted R on the tarmac, used to signify a reserved parking space. I mean, all of this can be explained away, right? Eventually someone would have found the remains of the dead king, but you can't deny the fact that the strange cosmic coincidence that led Langley to his final resting place is much more mysterious than a dead English king in a car park. And finally, coming in at a number 1 spot, the Tunguska event. And I absolutely love this entry for its cosmic significance alone and the potential warning sign that we should all be very wary of. Let's head on over to remote Siberia, where on the bright summer morning of the 30th of June 1908, a massive impact explosion, the likes of which has never before been seen in human history, completely flattened a remote area of the Siberian wilderness, covering over 2,000 square kilometers of isolated forest. As far as we know, no one was caught in the blast, but if they were, they would have certainly been obliterated by a shockwave 1,000 times greater than that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The Tunguska explosion completely flattened over 80 million trees in its blast radius, rupturing their roots like grass to a lawnmower. 50 or so miles away, those native to the region were knocked flat on their feet by the blast, windows shattered and buildings subsided. For all intents and purposes, it was the result of an unimaginable power. And if Tunguska had occurred over a metropolitan area, an entire city would have likely been flattened. So, what was it? Well, the leading scientific consensus is that the explosion of the Tunguska event was caused by the impact of a small asteroid, one that had possibly burned up in Earth's atmosphere and then produced a shockwave that resulted in the aforementioned cataclysm. However, not everyone buys that hypothesis, and many other researchers and scientists have proposed the Tunguska event being the result of a leak of natural gas from deep within the Earth's crust that became ignited by a storm and resulted in the Tunguska hellfire. Most evidence, though, points towards Tunguska being the result of an asteroid, asteroid, albeit one that luckily somehow missed the vast majority of our entire populated planet. It's also important to note that researchers believe Tunguska to be the result of a small asteroid, which is a terrifying thought in itself. It poses an incredibly important question: how would our history have been shaped if the Tunguska event occurred somewhere else? What if its intended target had changed? And more importantly, are we prepared if it ever happens again?